recently, Congress fiercely debated the 2011 budget. And with the government shutdown looming, Congress finally resolved on a budget that would cut spending by $38 billion compared to the 2010 budget. This may seem like a large amount, but when you take into consideration the fact that the national debt now stands at over $14.2 trillion, you can see that this is simply just a drop in the bucket. I'm here to tell you that a $14.2 trillion national debt is something that each and every individual should be greatly concerned about. I'll outline exactly why we should be concerned about this debt, and then I'll give some examples of what you can do about it. First, I'd like to look at an example situation. Let's say, for instance, that we had a household with a budget that was structured like the federal government's budget is structured. Let's say this household has an annual income of $50,000 after taxes. Again, it's structured like the federal government. This would mean that they would have a debt of $323,000. You might be thinking, that could be a reasonable amount if it was a home mortgage. However, we have to look at the difference between equity and liability. With a home mortgage, the owners could sell the house and pay off the mortgage if they needed to. However, with the federal debt, it's pretty much all liability. Now let's look at the household borrowing. Again, it's structured like the federal budget. Using the same ratios, this household would borrow $38,000 a year just to keep up with its spending. So, obviously, this household budget would be destined for bankruptcy. It would never work. So, what decisions, what cuts would this household make to try to remedy the situation? Well, if they cut at the same ratio that the 2011 budget is proposing, then they would cut just 1%. What this would amount to for this household is simply cutting $880. Wouldn't quite get there. Next, I want to look at the exponential nature of the national debt. From 1990 to 2000, the debt increased by 75%. However, from 2000 until 2010, the debt increased by more than 140% over this decade. And these are not normal numbers historically. If you look at the 2 decades from 1950 to 1970, the national debt only increased by 44%. The next topic I want to hit on is unfunded obligations. Now this is basically entitlements programs such as Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security. Now the General Accounting Office estimates that $45.8 trillion would have to be set aside today to cover these commitments through 2084. Now with these entitlement spending increasing, one can easily see that paying off the national debt is nearly impossible. Next, let's look at interest expenses. Currently, 9% of the federal budget simply goes towards paying off the interest on the debt. This is 4 times the amount that we spend federally on education in this country. Next topic I want to look at is the risks to the economy. Now there's many different risks that it has to the national economy, but I'll touch on a few. The first one is devaluation. Now this is basically the purchasing power of the dollar decreasing as the value of the US dollar decreases with respect to other world currencies. The next thing I want to look at is the very real possibility of the US dollar being replaced as the reserve country, the reserve currency throughout the world. Now this would basically just mean that the dollar would lose respect. No longer would currencies peg their rates based upon ours, and we would lose a lot of influence and value of the US dollar. The next topic I want to hit on is the national debt as a percentage of the gross domestic product, as a percentage of GDP. Right now, for the US, the percentage is over 90%. So clearly, this is something that is going to reduce the long-term economic growth in this country. Noted economists Kenneth Rogoff and Carmen Reinhart did a study in 2010 of 20 advanced countries and study concerning their GDP growth. They found that for countries with debt as a percentage of GDP, with their debt under 60% of GDP, the average GDP growth in that country was 3.4%. However, with countries with debt above 90% of GDP, which is where the U.S. stands, they found that the average growth rate is 1.6%. So that's only half of what it stands for countries with significantly less debt. The final subject I want to talk about is how the national debt is increasing our reliance on foreign countries. Currently, 47% of the nation's public debt is held by foreign investors, notably China, as well as many of our oil exporters hold a great percentage of it as well. This is compared to 25% in 2007. So this is a great increase in just 4 years. This, coupled with an increasing trade deficit, means that we're going to lose basically economic clout in the world, economic independence and influence. So now that we've looked at some of the problems and why we all need to be concerned about this, let me give you my call to action. First of all, we need to wake up. This problem certainly can't wait. When you look at how the debt grows exponentially, we're already well behind the power curve. If we don't take the bull by the horns right now, we're basically headed for an economic train wreck. Finally, everybody needs to take action and take responsibility. I encourage everybody to do your own research on this topic. Don't just take my word for it. Also, I encourage everybody to vote. Do their research before they vote, but above all, make sure you vote. Finally, it's important that everybody take responsibility for their own finances and practice good fiscal responsibility and pass that on to their children as well. Because a culture of debt-conscious citizens is certainly a lot more likely to have debt-conscious government.